The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Bisbee, Arizona Territory, in 1881, but Zachariah Xavier barely flinched. He'd grown accustomed to the chaotic symphony of the frontier town, the brawls spilling from saloons, the miners arguing over claims, and unfortunately, his own children's wild hollering as they tore through town like a band of miniature outlaws. "Jackson! Emma! Samuel!" Zach bellowed, his deep voice carrying over the midday bustle as he spotted his 3 children racing down the boardwalk, knocking into a well-dressed lady who dropped her parcels with a startled cry. His face flushed with embarrassment and anger as he quickened his pace toward them. "Stop right there!" The children scattered like quail, his 11-year-old son Jackson ducking down an alley, 9-year-old Emma darting into the general store, and 7-year-old Samuel freezing in place with wide eyes before bolting toward the livery stable. Zach cursed under his breath, tipping his hat apologetically to the woman as he helped gather her fallen items. "I'm terribly sorry, madam. They're spirited. They're wild as coyotes, Mr. Xavier," the woman replied with a disapproving sniff. "This town talks, you know. A man can't raise children proper without a mother's touch." The familiar ache settled in Zach's chest. 3 years since Caroline had died, bringing Samuel into the world, and he was failing them all. His cattle ranch outside town demanded his attention from sunrise to sunset, and the children were growing increasingly unmanageable in the interim. "Yes, madam," he said quietly, turning away before she could see the pain in his eyes. By the time Zach collected his unruly brood and loaded them into the wagon for the ride back to the ranch, his patience had worn thinner than his work gloves. The children bickered the entire 5-mile journey, and he found himself wondering, not for the first time, if the townsfolk were right. Perhaps he couldn't do this alone. As the wagon crested the final hill overlooking their modest ranch, a 2-story house, barn, corral, and grazing land stretching toward the Mule Mountains, Zach spotted an unfamiliar figure on their porch. He instinctively reached for the rifle tucked beside him. "Stay put," he instructed the children, who for once fell silent at the seriousness in his tone. As they drew closer, Zach realized the figure was a woman. She sat on his porch steps, her body curled protectively around a clearly swollen belly. Her dress was dusty and travel-worn, her bonnet hung limply in her hands, revealing auburn hair that caught the late afternoon sun. At the sound of the wagon, she looked up, revealing an exhausted face with striking green eyes that held equal measures of determination and desperation. "Who's that, Pa?" Emma whispered. "I don't know," Zach replied, bringing the wagon to a stop, "but she looks to be in some trouble." The woman struggled to her feet as Zach approached, one hand braced against her lower back, the other cradling her belly. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or so, with a smattering of freckles across a nose that had seen too much sun recently. "Mr. Xavier?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite her obvious fatigue. "Yes, madam," Zach replied cautiously. "May I help you? My name is Temperance Abernathy. Your name was given to me in town as someone who might." She hesitated, swallowing hard, "who might have need of household help. I understand you have children and no wife to tend them." Zach stiffened, annoyed at the town's gossip but unable to deny the truth of it. He glanced back at his curious children still sitting in the wagon. "Miss Abernathy, it appears you're in a delicate condition yourself." "I'm not sure, Mrs.," she corrected quietly. "Mrs. Abernathy. My husband died 3 months ago at a mining camp near Tombstone. I have nowhere to go, Mr. Xavier, and this child will come in less than 2 months' time." Her chin lifted slightly. "I'm strong and capable. I can cook, clean, sew, and manage children." I don't ask for charity, only fair work for fair pay and a roof until I can make other arrangements. Something in her eyes, pride mixed with raw vulnerability, struck Zach deeply. Here was a woman as alone as he was, but carrying an additional burden he couldn't imagine. Pa. Samuel called, impatient with waiting. Can we get down now? Zach hesitated only a moment longer. Children, come meet Mrs. Abernathy. She's going to be helping us for a while. The look of relief that washed over Temperance's face was so profound, it made Zach wonder just how desperate her situation truly was. What he couldn't know then was how completely this pregnant widow would transform not just his wild household, but his guarded heart. The children descended upon Temperance like a swarm of curious bees. Emma circled her, eyes wide at the prominent belly. "Is there really a baby in there?" she asked, reaching out a hand before Zach could stop her. To his surprise, Temperance smiled and gently took Emma's hand, placing it on the side of her belly. "Yes, and quite an active one. Feel here." Emma's eyes widened in wonder as she felt a kick. "Samuel, Jackson, come feel the baby." Jackson hung back, arms crossed in an imitation of his father's stance. "We don't need no housekeeper," he muttered. "We do just fine." Zach placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "That's enough, Jackson. Mrs. Abernathy has traveled a long way. Let's show her some Xavier hospitality." Temperance's eyes met Zach's, a flash of gratitude in their green depths. "I don't expect to be welcomed with open arms, Mr. Xavier. I know this is unconventional." "Call me Zach," he replied, surprising himself with the informality. "And unconventional is the foundation of life out here. Come inside and rest while I tend to the horses. Emma can show you to the spare room." As Temperance disappeared into the house with Emma chattering excitedly beside her and Samuel trailing behind, Zach turned to find Jackson glaring at him. "She's gonna try to replace Ma," the boy said accusingly. Zach sighed, unhitching the team with practiced movements. "No one can replace your mother, son, but we need help and Mrs. Abernathy needs work. It's a fair arrangement. For how long?" Jackson demanded. "I don't know," Zach admitted. "Let's take it one day at a time." That first night, Zach lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another adult moving through his home. The creak of floorboards as Temperance made her way to the kitchen before dawn. The soft clatter of cookware. The gentle humming of a tune he didn't recognize. By sunrise, the smell of fresh coffee and biscuits filled the house, scents that had been absent since Caroline's passing. Zach dressed quickly and found Temperance at the stove, her auburn hair neatly braided, wearing one of Caroline's old aprons that he'd never had the heart to discard. "You didn't need to rise so early," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Early rising is a habit that serves well on a ranch," she replied, sliding a plate of biscuits onto the table. "Besides, the baby seems to think dawn is the perfect time for dancing." A small smile tugged at Zach's mouth. "Caroline used to say the same about Emma. Never gave us a night's peace before she was born and not much after either." At the mention of his late wife, an awkward silence fell between them. "Mr. Xavier, Zach," Temperance said carefully, "I want to be clear that I understand my place here. I'm not trying to step into shoes that can't be filled." Before he could respond, the thundering of feet on the stairs announced the children's arrival. To Zach's astonishment, all three were dressed, with faces and hands washed. "I may have mentioned that breakfast is served promptly at 6, Temperance explained with a small smile at his surprise. Jackson approached the table warily, eyeing the biscuits. "Pa usually gives us cold beans or porridge." "And you're welcome to that if you prefer," Temperance replied evenly, not rising to the challenge in the boy's tone. "But while I'm here, I'll be cooking proper meals." Samuel climbed into his chair eagerly. "I want biscuits with honey Emma followed suit. Me too. Can I help cook tomorrow, Mrs. Abernathy? I'd appreciate that, Emma, Temperance said, sliding into a chair with a slight wince, one hand supporting her belly. Are you unwell? Zach asked, noticing the discomfort crossing her features. Just the usual complaints of an expecting mother, she assured him. Nothing to concern yourself with. As they ate, Zach observed the natural way Temperance engaged with his children, asking questions about their interests and responsibilities without being intrusive. Even Jackson begrudgingly answered her queries about the ranch's operations. I'll need to ride out to check the north pasture fences today, Zach announced as they finished eating. Jackson, you'll come with me. Emma and Samuel, you'll stay here and help Mrs. Abernathy get settled. Emma nodded enthusiastically, but Samuel pouted. I want to go with you, Pa. Not today, son. Mrs. Abernathy might need your strong arms to help around the house. Temperance picked up on his cue. Indeed I will. I've heard you're quite the capable young man, Samuel. The boy straightened, chest puffing out. I'm the strongest in my grade at school. Then you're just who I need for some special tasks, she replied with a warm smile that transformed her tired face into something Zach found unexpectedly beautiful. The realization made him push back from the table abruptly. We'd best get moving, Jackson. Daylight's wasting. As Zach and Jackson rode out, the boy remained unusually silent for the first mile. Something on your mind, son? Zach finally asked. Jackson frowned, adjusting his hat against the morning sun. How long is she staying? I don't know. Until after the baby comes, at least. And then what happens to her baby? The question caught Zach off guard. I suppose that's for her to decide. She doesn't have family. I don't believe so. Jackson fell silent again, processing this information with a maturity that sometimes startled Zach. At 11, his eldest was already showing the thoughtful nature that had drawn Zach to Caroline years ago. It ain't right, Jackson finally said. A baby needs a pa. Sometimes life doesn't give us what's right, son. It gives us what is. They spent the day mending fences and checking on the herd, but Zach found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to the house and the strange new arrangement he'd stumbled into. It was past sunset when they returned, and the sight that greeted them was one Zach had thought he might never see again. Lamplight glowed from clean windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, and when they entered, the house smelled of fresh bread and stew. The floor had been swept, the surfaces dusted. Emma was setting the table with actual place settings instead of the mismatched tins they typically used, and Samuel was carefully carrying a stack of folded napkins. Temperance emerged from the kitchen, a light sheen of perspiration on her brow but a look of satisfied accomplishment in her eyes. Perfect timing, she said. Dinner's ready. During the meal, Emma chattered excitedly about how they'd spent the day helping Temperance turn out all the bedrooms, washing windows, and even starting on mending clothes that had been piling up for months. Mrs. Abernathy knows how to make dresses too, Emma exclaimed. She says she can teach me. That's kind of her, Zach said, catching Temperance's eye across the table. You've accomplished a great deal for someone in your condition. Keeping busy helps me not to dwell on things, she replied simply. And your children were excellent helpers, even Samuel. Zach asked with a raised eyebrow, knowing his youngest's tendency to start tasks with enthusiasm only to abandon them halfway. Samuel has a particular talent for storytelling, Temperance said diplomatically. He entertained me while folding laundry. Samuel grinned. I told her about the time we saw the mountain lion, Pa, and about how you shot that rattler that almost bit Jackson. I may have had to clarify which parts were embellished, Temperance added with a small smile. For the first time in years, Zach felt the weight of sole responsibility lighten just a fraction. The evening continued with Temperance supervising the children's cleanup after dinner, and then settling them in the parlor where she read aloud from a book of frontier tales she'd found on their dusty shelf. Later, after the children were in bed, Zach found Temperance on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky. "Thank you," he said simply, leaning against the porch railing. "You've brought order to chaos in a single day." "The chaos will return tomorrow," she replied with a wry smile. "Children are creatures of entropy, Mr. Xavier." "Zach," he reminded her. "Zach," she echoed softly. "I should thank you for taking in a stranger in my condition. Not everyone would be so charitable." "It isn't charity if you're working harder than I could ask of any hired help." She rubbed her belly absently. "I won't always be quite so encumbered. Once the baby comes, I'll be even more useful." The practical nature of her statement struck Zach as sad somehow. "Where will you go after?" he found himself asking. Temperance looked away, her profile softly illuminated by the light spilling from the house windows. "I have some savings. Perhaps I'll open a small seamstress shop in Bisbee or Tombstone. Alone, with an infant." "I don't have the luxury of many options," she said, a hint of steel entering her voice. "Women in my position rarely do." Zach wanted to ask more about her husband, about what had brought her to his doorstep specifically, but something in her posture told him she'd shared all she was willing to for one night. "Well," he said, straightening, "you have a place here for as long as you need it. The children and I are." "Much obliged for your help." She nodded, one hand pressed to her lower back in what seemed to be a habitual gesture of discomfort. "Good night, Zach." As she passed him to enter the house, the scent of lavender briefly registered in his consciousness, another domestic detail that had been absent for too long. It wasn't until he was preparing for bed that Zach realized the day had passed without a single complaint from the townsfolk about his children's behavior, without having to scold them repeatedly, without the bone-deep exhaustion of trying to be both mother and father. One day of peace. It seemed like a miracle. The miracle continued through the next week, as Temperance established routines and boundaries that the children responded to with surprising willingness. Even Jackson's initial resistance began to soften as she respected his position as the oldest and gave him responsibilities that acknowledged his importance in the family. On her 8th day at the ranch, Zach returned from town to find Temperance in the barn with all 3 children, demonstrating how to milk the family cow, a task that had fallen to Zach since Caroline's death, and that he often neglected in favor of more pressing ranch work. "My father raised dairy cows in Missouri," she explained when she saw Zach watching from the doorway. "I thought the children might like to learn. Fresh milk and butter would be a nice addition to our meals. The casual way she included herself in the household struck him. "Pa, look," Emma called excitedly. "I got milk to come out." "Well done," Zach said, smiling at his daughter's pride. He noticed that Temperance had fashioned Emma's hair into a neat braid adorned with a ribbon he didn't recognize. Later, as they walked back to the house together, the children running ahead, Zach commented on the change. "Emma seems happier. The ribbon is a nice touch." Temperance glanced at him. "I hope you don't mind. I had some bits of fabric and notions in my trunk. Girls her age like pretty things." "I wouldn't know what to do with ribbons," Zach admitted. "Caroline always handled those matters." "You've done admirably on your own," Temperance said. "Your children are bright, healthy, and fundamentally good-hearted. That speaks well of your care." The unexpected compliment warmed something in Zach's chest. They were wild as mustangs when you met them. Children need structure and attention. You've been providing for them in the most important ways, keeping them fed, sheltered, and loved. The rest is just Details. Details that make a house a home, Zach said quietly. Details I've been neglecting. Temperance stopped walking, one hand automatically supporting her belly. Mr. Xavier, Zach, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not criticizing your parenting. Far from it. I know, he assured her. But I can see the difference your presence has made in just a week. I'm grateful. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with his sincerity. As they resumed walking, a sudden gasp from Temperance made Zach turn sharply. Are you all right? She had both hands pressed to her belly now, her face momentarily tense. Yes, just a particularly strong kick. This little one is going to be a fighter, I think. Like its mother, Zach observed. Her eyes met his, surprised. You think I'm a fighter? A woman who travels alone in your condition, seeking work instead of charity. Yes, I'd say you've got fighting spirit. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Necessity breeds courage, I suppose. Before Zach could respond, Samuel came racing back toward them. Pa, Mrs. Abernathy, come quick. There's a snake by the water trough. The moment broken, they hurried after the boy, Temperance moving with surprising quickness despite her condition. By the time they reached the water trough, Jackson had already positioned himself between Emma and the coiled rattlesnake, a long stick in his hand. Stay back, Zach ordered, drawing his revolver. Wait, Temperance said, placing a restraining hand on his arm. It's not a rattlesnake. Look at the pattern. Zach paused, studying the snake. She was right, the markings were similar, but this was a harmless bull snake. She's right, children, Zach said, holstering his weapon. This snake actually helps us by keeping the rodent population down and driving away real rattlers. We'll leave him be. How did you know? He asked Temperance quietly as they shepherded the children back to the house. My brother was fascinated with all manner of creatures. I learned to tell the difference between venomous and harmless snakes after he brought one too many into our house as pets. It was the first time she'd mentioned a brother, and Zach found himself curious about her family. Is your brother still in Missouri? A shadow crossed her face. No, he died at Shiloh. I'm sorry, Zach said, the weight of the war between the states still heavy 16 years after its conclusion. Did you lose others, my father, at Vicksburg? My mother passed from pneumonia the winter after. Her voice was matter of fact, but Zach sensed the deep wells of grief beneath her composed exterior. You've faced more than your share of loss, he observed. As have you, she countered. Life in the West seems to demand its pound of flesh from everyone eventually. Is that why you came west? After losing your family, they had reached the porch, and Temperance paused, one hand on the railing. I came with my husband, Thomas. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. A wistful smile touched her lips. He was an eternal optimist, always certain the next claim would be the one. And was it? Zach asked gently. No. He died in a tunnel collapse at a camp near Tombstone. 3 other men were killed as well. She took a deep breath. I was already expecting by then. I stayed on at the camp as long as I could, taking in laundry and mending, but it wasn't a place for a woman alone, Zach finished for her. She nodded. The foreman's wife suggested I try Bisbee. Said there was good work for domestic help, and it was more civilized than the mining camps. When I arrived, I took a room at the boarding house and started asking about positions. The mercantile owner's wife mentioned a rancher with 3 children and no wife. Temperance met his eyes directly. She said you were a good man who treated people fairly. Mrs. Henderson has a soft spot for strays, Zach said with a slight smile. Though I'm glad for her interference this time. They were interrupted by Emma calling from inside the house. Mrs. Abernathy. I can't find the blue thread you promised. Duty calls, Temperance said with a small smile and disappeared inside. That evening, Zach found himself studying Temperance as she worked on a piece of mending. Her hands were graceful despite their obvious strength, and she hummed softly as she worked. The children were already in bed, the house quiet except for the occasional pop from the fireplace and the rhythmic sound of her needle passing through fabric. "You sing beautifully," he commented. Startled, she looked up. "Oh, I didn't realize I was humming, an old habit. It's nice. The house has been too quiet for too long." She set aside her mending. "May I ask about your wife? The children speak of her sometimes, but I don't want to presume." Zach leaned back in his chair, memories washing over him. Caroline was sunshine, always smiling, always finding joy in simple things. He paused. "We met in Texas after the war. I was working cattle drives. She was a school teacher. Married in '68, came to Arizona in '70 when I'd saved enough for this place. She must have been very brave to start a life out here. She was. Never complained even when things were lean. She loved the children fiercely." His throat tightened. "When we learned she was expecting Samuel, we were thrilled. But the pregnancy was difficult from the start. The doctor warned us." He trailed off. "You don't need to continue," Temperance said softly. "No, it's all right." Zach drew a deep breath. "There were complications during the birth. By the time we got the doctor from town, it was too late. She held Samuel once before." He couldn't finish. Temperance's face reflected compassion without pity. "I'm so sorry, Zach. What a terrible choice to face." Her understanding of what he hadn't explicitly stated, that he'd had to choose between saving his wife or his son, struck him deeply. Few people grasped that aspect of his grief. "Samuel doesn't remember her at all, of course," Zach continued. "Emma has fragments of memories. Jackson remembers the most, which I think is why he struggled the hardest with her absence. And with my presence," Temperance added perceptively, "he'll come around. He's a good boy at heart." Temperance nodded, her hand absently rubbing her belly. "Children are remarkably resilient, but they need time to adjust to change." She winced suddenly. "Another strong kick?" Zach asked. "Yes, this little one is particularly active at night. Thomas used to talk to my belly to try to settle the baby." A sad smile crossed her face. "He was so excited to become a father." "He would be proud of your courage," Zach said. Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loss, of unexpected understanding. For a brief moment, Zach felt a connection he hadn't experienced since Caroline's death. It both comforted and alarmed him. "I should retire," Temperance said, breaking the moment as she awkwardly pushed herself to her feet. "Tomorrow's baking day, of course. Rest well, Temperance." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the slight widening of her eyes told him she'd noticed. "Good night, Zach," she replied softly and made her way upstairs. Alone in the parlor, Zach remained by the dying fire, his thoughts in turmoil. The widow was bringing more than order to his household. She was bringing emotions he'd thought long buried, feelings he wasn't sure he was ready to examine. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that felt both novel and strangely familiar to Zach. Temperance's presence transformed the ranch house into a true home again. Meals were served at regular times. Clean clothes appeared in drawers as if by magic, and the children's schoolwork received proper attention. Even more remarkably, his wild children began to show signs of civilization. Emma blossomed under Temperance's guidance, proudly learning household skills and developing an interest in reading that had previously been overshadowed by her rambunctious nature. Samuel, always eager to please, appointed himself Temperance's special helper, following her around the house, offering assistance that was more enthusiastic than useful, but which she accepted with gracious thanks. Jackson remained more reserved, But even he began to soften as Temperance skillfully drew him out, asking his opinion on ranch matters and treating him with a respect that acknowledged his position as the eldest. She never tried to replace Caroline in their lives, instead creating her own unique relationship with each child. As Temperance's pregnancy advanced, Zach found himself increasingly concerned for her welfare. He noticed her taking more frequent breaks, wincing when she thought no one was watching, and moving more deliberately through her tasks. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said one evening after the children were in bed. "I hired you as help, not to work yourself to exhaustion." Temperance looked up from the small garment she was sewing something for the baby, he realized. "I'm just a bit more tired as the time grows closer. It's perfectly normal. Nonetheless, I'm riding into town tomorrow to see if Mrs. Henderson might spare her daughter to help with the heavier work for a few weeks." "That's not necessary," Temperance protested. "I'm perfectly capable. It wasn't a suggestion," Zach interrupted firmly. "You've done more for this family in a month than I had any right to expect. Now it's time to think of your health and your child." She looked as though she might argue further, but then relented with a small nod. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's very considerate." The next day, Zach returned from Bisbee with 16-year-old Lily Henderson, who would come 3 times a week to help with laundry and heavier cleaning. He also brought a letter for Temperance, delivered to the general store with a request to forward it to the Xavier Ranch. "It's from Alice Morgan," Temperance explained as she opened it. "The foreman's wife at the mining camp where Thomas died. She was kind to me after." Zach busied himself with his ledger books as she read, giving her privacy. When he glanced up several minutes later, he was alarmed to see tears streaming down her face. "Temperance, what's wrong?" He moved to her side, awkwardly placing a hand on her shoulder. "She writes that a man has been asking questions about me at the camp," Temperance said, her voice shaking slightly. "A man claiming to be Thomas's brother, though Thomas never mentioned having a brother. Alice says he seemed unsavory, angry when told I'd left the camp." "Do you think he's actually related to your husband?" Temperance shook her head. "Thomas was an only child. He told me his parents died when he was young, and he was raised by an aunt in Pennsylvania. He had no siblings." "Then who would be looking for you?" She folded the letter carefully. "I don't know. Perhaps someone who thinks Thomas found silver before he died. There were always rumors in the camps about secret strikes and hidden claims. Did he find anything valuable?" "No." Her answer was quick and certain. "Thomas died with nothing but debts and dreams." Zach studied her face, troubled by the fear he saw there. "If this man comes to Bisbee asking questions, word will get back to me. The ranch is remote enough that you're safe here." "I wouldn't want to bring trouble to your door," she said. "Perhaps I should move on. In your condition." "Where would you go?" Temperance had no answer for that. "You'll stay," Zach said with finality. "Whatever this is, we'll face it when and if it comes. For now, you need rest and security for yourself and your child." The gratitude in her eyes made something twist in his chest. How long had it been since anyone had offered this proud, independent woman protection? Since she'd had someone to lean on, even temporarily. "Thank you," she whispered. Acting on impulse, Zach reached out and covered her hand with his own. "We look after our own here, Temperance. You and your baby are under my protection now." The touch lasted only seconds, but it sent a jolt of awareness through him that he hadn't felt in years. From the slight widening of Temperance's eyes, he suspected she felt it too. Clearing his throat, he pulled his hand away. "I should check on the children. Jackson was supposed to be teaching the younger ones how to brush down the horses." As he strode from the house, Zach tried to make sense of his conflicted emotions. Temperance had been with them just over a month, yet somehow she'd become essential to their household to him. The thought of her leaving, of the house returning to its previous state of cheerless chaos, was surprisingly painful. He found the children in the barn, Jackson patiently demonstrating proper grooming techniques to his siblings. The sight of his normally impatient eldest son showing such care made Zach pause in the doorway, watching unobserved. "Mrs. Abernathy says a horse knows when you respect it," Jackson was saying. "If you're gentle but firm and you care for it properly, it'll be loyal to you." "Is that why Rusty always lets you ride him, even when he's grumpy with everyone else?" Samuel asked. "Probably," Jackson replied with a hint of pride. "Mrs. Abernathy says animals know who truly cares for them." "Mrs. Abernathy says a lot of things," Emma chimed in. "She's the smartest lady I know, except for maybe Miss Collins at school." The children's easy acceptance and admiration of Temperance struck Zach forcefully. When had that happened? When had they gone from suspicion to such open respect? "Pa," Samuel spotted him and waved enthusiastically. "Look, Jackson taught us how to check for stones in their hooves." "I see that," Zach said, stepping into the barn. "You're becoming quite the horseman, Samuel." "Mrs. Abernathy says I have a natural way with animals," Samuel informed him proudly. "Does she now?" Zach ruffled his son's hair. "Well, she's a good judge of character." "Pa," Emma said, her expression suddenly serious. "Is Mrs. Abernathy's baby going to die like Ma did when Samuel was born?" The question hit Zach like a physical blow. Of course the children would make that connection. It was their only experience with childbirth. Jackson spoke before Zach could find his voice. "Don't be stupid, Emma. Ma was sick before Samuel came. Mrs. Abernathy is healthy." "Your brother's right," Zach said, grateful for Jackson's intervention. "What happened to your mother was very rare and sad. Most babies are born just fine and their mothers too." "But what if something does happen?" Emma persisted. "Who will take care of her baby?" The innocent question hung in the air, and Zach saw his own unacknowledged concern reflected in his children's eyes. "Mrs. Abernathy is going to be fine," he said firmly. "Dr. Wells will attend her when the time comes and will all help care for her and the baby. That's what neighbors do for each other." "But we're not neighbors," Samuel pointed out. "She lives with us." "Then we're even more responsible for helping her," Zach explained. "Just like she helps us." The children seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to their horse grooming lesson. But later that night, Zach found himself unable to sleep, Emma's question echoing in his mind. What if something did happen? The thought of Temperance suffering the same fate as Caroline was unbearable. The next morning, Zach rode into town again, this time to speak with Dr. Wells directly. "How well do you know Mrs. Abernathy?" the doctor asked after Zach explained his concerns. "Well enough to know she's a decent woman who deserves better than the hand life has dealt her," Zach replied. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "I'll ride out next week to examine her, but from what you've described, she sounds healthy despite her circumstances." "Childbirth is always risky, Mr. Xavier, but women are remarkably resilient creatures." "Caroline was resilient too," Zach said quietly. Understanding crossed the doctor's face. "What happened to your wife was a tragedy, but not one that's likely to repeat itself with Mrs. Abernathy." "Different women, different circumstances." Zach nodded, somewhat reassured. "I'd be obliged if you'd bring whatever supplies might be needed for when her time comes. I'll pay whatever's necessary." "Of course." The doctor studied him curiously. "You seem quite invested in Mrs. Abernathy's welfare for someone who's merely employed her." Zach stiffened. "She's alone in the world and carrying a child. What kind of man wouldn't be concerned?" Dr. Wells held up a placating hand. "I meant no offense. It speaks well of you, Mr. Xavier." The lady is fortunate to have found such a considerate employer. As Zach left the doctor's office, he nearly collided with Mrs. Henderson coming out of the mercantile. "Mr. Xavier, just the man I wanted to see," she exclaimed. "How is our Mrs. Abernathy settling in?" "Very well, thank you. And thank you again for allowing Lily to help." Mrs. Henderson nodded, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. "There's been a stranger asking questions about a pregnant widow. Described her as auburn-haired, green-eyed in her 20s. Sound familiar?" Zach felt a chill despite the warm day. "What kind of questions?" Wanting to know if she'd passed through town, where she might have gone. Said he was family looking to help her in her time of need. Mrs. Henderson's expression made it clear she didn't believe this claim. "I didn't care for his manner, so I played ignorant." "Did he give a name?" Called himself James Abernathy. Said he was her brother-in-law. Mrs. Henderson sniffed disapprovingly. "If that man is any relation to our Mrs. Abernathy, I'll eat my Sunday bonnet." "Thank you for the warning," Zach said grimly. "If he returns, I'd appreciate you sending word to the ranch, of course. And Mr. Xavier?" Mrs. Henderson's eyes were shrewd. "You might want to have a word with Sheriff Burke, just as a precaution." Zach took her advice, stopping by the sheriff's office before leaving town. Sheriff Burke listened to his concerns with a thoughtful expression. "I'll keep an eye out for this James Abernathy character," he promised. "And I'll ask around, see if anyone knows anything about him or the late Mr. Abernathy. Mining camps are full of desperate men with secrets." "I appreciate it, Sheriff. Mrs. Abernathy is important to my household." The sheriff's eyes twinkled knowingly. "So I've heard. Town's talking about how your wild youngsters have turned into proper little citizens since she arrived." "Town always talks," Zach said dryly. "That it does. But in this case, folks are mighty impressed." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Some are even placing bets on how long before you make the arrangement more permanent." Zach felt heat rise to his face. "Mrs. Abernathy is recently widowed and expecting her late husband's child. Such speculation is inappropriate and disrespectful." "Meant no offense," Sheriff Burke said easily. "Just sharing what I've heard. Folks mean well. They know a good match when they see one." Zach left town with his thoughts in turmoil. Was that how people viewed his relationship with Temperance? As a potential match. The idea was presumptuous, disrespectful to Caroline's memory, and completely not entirely unwelcome. A small voice whispered in his mind. He pushed the thought away firmly. Temperance was a widow preparing to welcome her husband's child. Whatever growing feelings he might be experiencing were inappropriate and unwanted. She needed his protection and support, not romantic complications. When he returned to the ranch, he found Temperance in the garden with Emma, harvesting late summer vegetables. The sight of them working side by side, their heads bent together in conversation, created an ache in his chest. Emma was laughing at something Temperance had said, her face alight with joy that had been too rare since Caroline's death. Zach dismounted and approached them, deciding not to mention the stranger asking questions in town. No need to worry Temperance unnecessarily when the man might simply move on. "Quite the harvest," he commented, looking at their nearly full basket. Temperance straightened slowly, one hand supporting her lower back. "The garden was well planned. Your wife had a good eye for companion planting. Caroline loved gardening. I've maintained it as best I could, but I lack her green thumb." "You've done admirably," Temperance assured him. "Emma and I were just discussing expanding it next spring to include more herbs and perhaps some flowers." Next spring. The casual mention of a future that included her presence sent an unexpected wave of pleasure through Zach. "Pa, Mrs. Abernathy knows how to dry herbs for cooking and medicine." Emma said excitedly, "She's going to teach me." Is she now? Zach smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. Well, that's a useful skill to have. It's nothing special, Temperance demurred. Just knowledge passed down from my mother. Don't diminish your abilities, Zach said. Knowledge of healing plants can make the difference between life and death out here, far from doctors. A light blush colored Temperance's cheeks at his praise. Speaking of doctors, Lily mentioned you rode to town to speak with Dr. Wells about me. Now it was Zach's turn to feel embarrassed. I thought it prudent to ensure he's prepared when your time comes. He'll ride out next week to check on you. That's very thoughtful, but I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Zach interrupted firmly. You're part of this household now, and we take care of our own. Their eyes met over Emma's head, and something passed between them, understanding, gratitude, and perhaps something deeper that neither was ready to name. The moment was broken by Samuel's shout from the direction of the barn. Pa, Jackson says there's a coyote been at the chickens again. Zach sighed. Duty calls. We'll continue this conversation later. As he walked away, he heard Emma ask, Mrs. Abernathy, will you and your baby stay with us forever? He didn't hear Temperance's response, but the question lingered in his mind. Forever was a long time, but the thought of Temperance leaving once her child was born left an emptiness he wasn't prepared to face. Over the next week, Zach found himself watching Temperance more closely, noting how integral she'd become to their daily lives. The children sought her counsel, brought her their troubles and triumphs, and responded to her gentle guidance in ways they never had with the previous housekeepers he'd hired. Dr. Wells visited as promised, pronouncing Temperance in excellent health despite her advanced pregnancy. The baby appears to be in the proper position, and Mrs. Abernathy's constitution is strong, he reported to Zach afterward. I foresee no complications, but I've left supplies with her just in case I can't arrive in time. The doctor's reassurance eased some of Zach's anxiety, but he still found himself checking on Temperance more frequently, insisting she rest in the afternoons, and taking on tasks he would normally have left to her. You're hovering, Mr. Xavier, she told him with gentle amusement one evening as he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry for her. Just being considerate, he replied. And I thought we'd agreed you'd call me Zach. Zach, she amended with a small smile. While I appreciate your concern, I'm not made of porcelain. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Humor me, he said. I've grown accustomed to having you around, Mrs. Abernathy. I'd like to keep it that way. Temperance, she reminded him, her smile widening. If we're to be informal, it should go both ways. Temperance, he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. A virtue I've never been particularly blessed with, I'm afraid. I've noticed, she teased, surprising him with her playfulness. You're more action than patience, I think. A necessary quality for surviving out here, he defended himself. Indeed. Though perhaps balanced with a touch of temperance now and then, he laughed, a full, rich sound that startled them both. When had he last laughed like that? Perhaps you're right. You've brought balance to more than just the household, it seems. The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something neither was ready to acknowledge. Finally, Temperance broke the silence. The children mentioned a harvest festival in town next week. Will you be attending? We usually do. It's one of the few social events of the year in Bisbee. Zach hesitated. Would you like to come with us? If you're feeling up to it, I would enjoy that, Temperance replied. Though I'm not sure I'll be much of a dancing partner in my condition. The image of dancing with Temperance, even with her rounded belly between them, sparked an unexpected yearning in Zach. I'm not much of a dancer myself, but the children would be delighted to have you there. Just the children. A voice in his head asked mockingly. Then I'll plan on it, she said. though I may need to make some adjustments to my dress first. The Harvest Festival became an exciting focal point for the household in the days that followed. Emma talked of little else, and even Jackson showed interest, particularly in the shooting contests held for the young men of the town. The night before the festival, Zach found himself uncharacteristically concerned about his appearance. He pulled his good suit from the back of the wardrobe, where it had languished since the last town social, and was dismayed to find it somewhat tight across the shoulders. Had he changed so much in the past year? The next morning, the house bustled with excited energy as everyone prepared for the outing. The children were scrubbed clean, their hair neatly combed, wearing their Sunday best. But it was Temperance who captured Zach's attention when she finally descended the stairs. She wore a dress he hadn't seen before, a deep blue that complemented her auburn hair and made her green eyes appear even more striking. Though obviously altered to accommodate her pregnancy, it was elegantly cut and showed care in its styling. Her hair was arranged in a neat chignon with a few soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Zach said before he could stop himself. A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. It's an old dress from before. I've been altering it in the evenings." "It suits you," he said simply. The ride to town was filled with the children's chatter, but Zach found his attention continually drawn to Temperance beside him on the wagon seat. She seemed both excited and nervous about the outing, her hands frequently smoothing the fabric of her dress. "Are you concerned about something?" he asked quietly while the children were distracted by the sight of other wagons heading to town. "It's my first real social outing since Thomas died," she admitted. "And the first time the town will see me with your family. I'm not sure how people will interpret my presence." Understanding dawned on Zach. "Are you worried about gossip?" "Not for myself," she said quickly, "but I wouldn't want to cause any embarrassment for you or the children. The only opinions that matter to me are those of the people in this wagon," Zach said firmly. "The rest can think what they will." Her grateful smile warmed him more than the autumn sun. The town square had been transformed for the festival, with tables laden with food, a platform for musicians, and various games and contests set up around the perimeter. As they arrived, Zach was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations their appearance generated. Sheriff Burke approached them almost immediately, his welcoming smile including Temperance. "Mrs. Abernathy, pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard nothing but good things." "Thank you, Sheriff," Temperance replied with quiet dignity. "It's a lovely festival, one of our town's prouder traditions," the sheriff agreed. He turned to Zach. "No sign of that fellow we discussed, by the way." Zach nodded, relieved but still wary. He'd hoped the mysterious James Abernathy had moved on, but the man's interest in Temperance continued to trouble him. The children quickly begged to be allowed to participate in various activities. Samuel wanted to try bobbing for apples. Emma was drawn to the quilting display, and Jackson was eager to register for the junior shooting competition. "Go ahead," Zach told them. "Just stay within sight and mind your manners." As the children scattered, Temperance and Zach found themselves momentarily alone amid the bustling crowd. "Would you care to sit?" he asked, noticing her slight wince as she shifted her weight. "Perhaps for a moment," she conceded. "This little one seems to be practicing for a foot race today." He guided her to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree where they had a good view of the festival activities. Several townspeople approached to greet them, most eyeing Temperance with undisguised curiosity. Mrs. Henderson made a point of stopping by, her husband in tow. "Mrs. Abernathy, how wonderful to see you out and about, and looking so well. Thank you for allowing Lily to help at the ranch," Temperance replied warmly. "She's been a godsend with the heavier work." "Nonsense." That child needed something useful to do besides moon over the blacksmith's apprentice. Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. I must tell you, the change in those Xavier children is nothing short of miraculous. Everyone's talking about it. They're wonderful children, Temperance said. They just needed some routine and attention. Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. And a woman's touch in that household. Her meaningful glance between Temperance and Zach made her implications clear. Before either could respond, a commotion from the direction of the shooting contest drew their attention. Jackson stood facing a larger boy who appeared to be taunting him. "Excuse me," Zach said, immediately rising and striding toward the confrontation. As he approached, he could hear the other boy's jeering tone. "Your ma died 'cause she was weak, and now your pa's taken up with another woman who'll probably die too. Bet he goes through wives like most men go through horses." Jackson's face was flushed with anger, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Shut your mouth, Billy Thompson. You don't know anything about my family. I know your pa didn't waste any time finding a replacement, and one that's already got a bun in the oven convenient, ain't it?" Zach reached them just as Jackson lunged at the larger boy. He caught his son mid-attack, stepping between the boys. "That's enough," he said firmly, one hand restraining Jackson, the other held up warningly toward Billy Thompson. "Mr. Xavier," Billy said, taking a step back. I heard what you were just doing," Zach cut him off coldly. "And if I ever hear you speak about my late wife or Mrs. Abernathy in that manner again, I'll be having a very different conversation with your father." "Understood," the boy nodded, suitably cowed. "Now get back to the contest and remember that good sportsmanship is part of being a man." As Billy slunk away, Zach turned to his son. Jackson's eyes were bright with unshed tears of anger and hurt. "He was saying awful things, Pa," Jackson said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know, son," Zach replied, placing a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "And you were right to defend our family's honor, but there are better ways than fighting. What he said about Ma, and about Mrs. Abernathy. People who don't understand sometimes say cruel things," Zach explained quietly. "It doesn't make them right." Jackson looked past his father, and Zach turned to see Temperance standing a few paces away, her expression concerned. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Just a disagreement between boys," Zach assured her, not wanting to upset her with the details of Billy's taunts. But Jackson stepped forward, his young face serious. "Mrs. Abernathy, I want you to know that I don't think what Billy said about you replacing my ma. I know that's not what's happening." Temperance's eyes softened as she regarded the boy. "Thank you, Jackson. That means a great deal to me. My ma would have liked you," Jackson added unexpectedly. "She always said actions speak louder than words, and you've done nothing but help us since you came." The simple statement from his usually reserved son struck Zach deeply. He watched as Temperance reached out and gently touched Jackson's cheek in a gesture of affection that the boy, surprisingly, didn't pull away from. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time," she told him. "Now, shouldn't you be showing everyone what an excellent marksman you are?" Jackson nodded, his moment of vulnerability passing as he straightened his shoulders and rejoined the contest. "That boy," Zach said quietly to Temperance as they watched him go, "has more wisdom than most grown men I know." "He's very much like his father," Temperance replied, her eyes meeting Zach's with warmth that made his heart skip a beat. The rest of the festival passed more pleasantly. Jackson won second place in the shooting contest. Emma received compliments on her embroidery work that Temperance had helped her with. And Samuel managed to stay relatively clean despite participating in every messy game available. As the afternoon waned, the musicians began playing for dancing. Despite her earlier protest that she wouldn't be much of a dancing partner, Zach found himself asking Temperance to join him for a slow waltz. "Are you sure?" she asked, glancing down at her prominent belly. "I'm not exactly light on my feet these days." "I'd be honored," he said simply, offering his hand. As they moved slowly around the edge of the dance floor, Zach was acutely aware of the stares and whispers their appearance generated. But all he could focus on was the woman in his arms, her hand in his, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "People are talking," she murmured, a hint of discomfort in her voice. "Let them," he replied. "You've brought joy back to my home, Temperance. I won't pretend otherwise to satisfy town gossips." Her eyes widened slightly at his words, a question in their depths that he wasn't quite ready to answer or perhaps didn't fully understand himself. The moment was interrupted by Samuel running up to them. "Pa, Mrs. Abernathy, come quick. They're going to announce the pie contest winners, and Mrs. Henderson says Emma's apple pie might win." The spell broken, they followed Samuel to the judge's table, where Emma was indeed awarded a blue ribbon for her pie, with some assistance from Mrs. Abernathy, the judge noted with a wink. Emma beamed with pride, clutching her ribbon. "We have to make another one when we get home to celebrate." "I think that's an excellent idea," Temperance agreed, her hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder. As the sun began to set, Zach gathered his family, for that was how he had come to think of them all, including Temperance, for the journey home. The children were tired but happy, full of stories and experiences to recount. Halfway home, Temperance suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "What is it?" Zach asked, instantly alarmed. "Nothing to worry about," she assured him, though her voice was tight. "Just a particularly strong movement. This little one is running out of room, I think." Zach wasn't entirely convinced but didn't press the issue. By the time they reached the ranch, however, Temperance was visibly uncomfortable, her face pale in the moonlight. "Children, help each other get ready for bed," Zach instructed as he assisted Temperance down from the wagon. "I'll be up shortly to say goodnight." Once inside, Temperance sank gratefully into a chair, both hands pressed to her belly. "Should I send for the doctor?" Zach asked, kneeling beside her chair. She shook her head. "No, it's not that time yet. Just some strong practice contractions, the doctor called them." "Perfectly normal at this stage." "You're sure?" "Yes. They're irregular and not particularly painful. When it's truly time, there will be no doubt." She offered a reassuring smile. "I'm just tired from the excitement of the day." Zach nodded, though concern lingered. "I'll help you upstairs after I check on the children." After ensuring his children were settled for the night, all three still buzzing with excitement from the day's events, Zach returned to find Temperance still seated, her eyes closed, hands rhythmically rubbing her belly. "Temperance," he said softly, her eyes opened slowly. "I'm sorry, I must have dozed off. Let me help you upstairs," he offered, extending his hand. She accepted his assistance gratefully, leaning on his arm more heavily than usual as they ascended the stairs. At the door to her room, Caroline's old sewing room that they had converted for her use, she paused. "Thank you for today," she said. "It was more than I expected." "In what way?" Zach asked. "I felt like I belonged somewhere again. With the children, with you." Her voice was soft, vulnerable in a way he rarely heard from her. "It's been a long time since I felt that." The admission touched something deep in Zach's heart. Without thinking, he reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You do belong," he said quietly. "More than you know." Her eyes met his, wide and questioning. For a moment, Zach thought he might lean forward, might cross that final boundary between them. But the baby chose that moment to kick forcefully, making Temperance gasp and step back slightly. The moment broken, Zach cleared his throat. "Rest well. Call if you need anything in the night." "I will. Good night, Zach." As she closed her door, Zach remained in the hallway for a long moment, his thoughts and feelings in turmoil. What was happening between them? Was it merely gratitude and convenience, or something deeper, more lasting? The question haunted him as he prepared for bed, and he found sleep elusive despite the long day. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were filled with Temperance's smile, the touch of her hand in his during their dance, and the way the children's faces lit up in her presence. He was awakened just before dawn by a soft knock on his bedroom door. Opening it, he found Emma in her nightgown, her face worried. "Pa, Mrs. Abernathy is sick. She's making funny noises and she told me to get you." Fully alert instantly, Zach pulled on his trousers. "Go wake Jackson and tell him to saddle my horse. I may need to ride for the doctor." Emma nodded and hurried off while Zach strode quickly to Temperance's room. He found her sitting on the edge of her bed, bent forward slightly, breathing heavily. "Temperance," she looked up, her face pale but composed. "I think it's time, Zach. My waters broke about an hour ago and the pains are coming regularly now." "I'll get the doctor," he said, already turning toward the door. "There's time," she assured him. "First babies often come slowly, but I would appreciate if you could help me downstairs. I don't want to. I'd rather not be in this room when it happens." Understanding dawned on Zach. This had been Caroline's sewing room, but before that, it had been their bedroom, the room where she had died bringing Samuel into the world. "Of course," he said gently. "Where would you be most comfortable?" "The parlor, I think. I've already prepared some things." Zach helped her downstairs, one strong arm supporting her as they navigated the steps. In the parlor, he found she had indeed prepared. There were clean linens stacked neatly, a basin of water, and various other supplies Dr. Wells had left. "You've been planning this," he observed as he helped her settle on the sofa. "I wanted to be ready, just in case," she replied, then gasped as another contraction seized her. Zach held her hand as she breathed through the pain, amazed at her calm composure in the face of what must be terrifying circumstances, giving birth far from family, in a stranger's home, after losing her husband. "I'll send Jackson for the doctor now," Zach said when the contraction passed. "Yes, that would be wise," Temperance agreed. "And perhaps Mrs. Henderson. Most men prefer not to be present for such things." "I'll send Emma for her, but I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to," Zach said firmly. "Caroline, I wasn't with her at the end. I was fetching the doctor." "I won't make that mistake again." Temperance's eyes filled with tears at his words. "You're a good man, Zachariah Xavier." The use of his full name, spoken with such tenderness, sent a wave of emotion through him that he couldn't fully process in the moment. "Pa." Jackson appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. "Is Mrs. Abernathy having her baby?" "Yes, son. I need you to ride for Dr. Wells immediately. Tell him the pains started about an hour ago and are coming regularly." Jackson nodded, his young face serious. "I'll be as fast as I can." As Jackson departed, Emma and Samuel appeared, their faces curious and concerned. "Is Mrs. Abernathy going to be all right?" Samuel asked, his voice small. "Yes, sweetheart," Temperance answered before Zach could. "Having a baby is hard work, but women are made for it." "I'll be fine, and soon you'll have a new little friend to help look after." Her calm reassurance seemed to ease the children's fears. Zach sent Emma to fetch Mrs. Henderson while instructing Samuel to bring fresh water from the well. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Henderson arrived, taking charge of the situation with practiced efficiency. Dr. Wells followed shortly after, examining Temperance and pronouncing everything progressing normally. "First babies often take their time," he told Zach. "It could be several more hours yet." Zach arranged for the children to stay with a neighbor for the day, wanting to spare them the more difficult aspects of childbirth. As the morning wore on, Temperance's labor intensified. Zach found himself alternating between pacing outside the parlor and sitting beside her, offering what comfort he could, despite Dr. Wells' assurance that everything was proceeding normally. Zach couldn't help but remember Caroline's difficult labor, the increasing panic as complications developed, the helplessness he'd felt as she slipped away despite the doctor's best efforts. "You're worrying yourself sick, Mrs. Henderson chided him during one of his pacing sessions. "Mrs. Abernathy is young and healthy. The baby is positioned properly. Everything will be fine." "That's what we thought with Caroline," Zach said grimly. "Lightning rarely strikes the same place twice, Mr. Xavier." Mrs. Henderson patted his arm sympathetically. "Have faith." By mid-afternoon, Temperance's labor had progressed to the point where Dr. Wells declared the birth imminent, despite Mrs. Henderson's protests that it wasn't proper. Zach insisted on staying, positioning himself behind Temperance to support her as she prepared to push. "You don't have to do this," Temperance gasped between contractions. "Yes, I do," Zach replied simply. "You're not alone in this, Temperance." She gripped his hands with surprising strength as the next contraction built. Dr. Wells coached her through the pushing, his calm confidence reassuring. "I can see the head," he announced after several intense pushes. "One more good effort, Mrs. Abernathy." With a cry that tore at Zach's heart, Temperance gave a final tremendous push. There was a moment of suspended time, and then the room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn. "You have a son, Mrs. Abernathy," Dr. Wells announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." The baby was placed on Temperance's chest, still connected by the umbilical cord, red-faced and angry at his eviction from his comfortable home. Temperance gazed down at him in wonder, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my little one," she whispered. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Over her shoulder, Zach stared at the miracle of new life, a lump forming in his throat. The baby had a shock of dark hair, tiny perfect fingers that grasped at the air, and a determined cry that spoke of strong lungs and a fighting spirit. "He's beautiful," Zach said, his voice thick with emotion. Temperance looked up at him, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "He is, isn't he? Perfect in every way." After the afterbirth was delivered and both mother and baby cleaned up, Mrs. Henderson and Dr. Wells tactfully withdrew to the kitchen, leaving Zach and Temperance alone with the newborn. Temperance had been moved to the armchair propped up with pillows, the baby swaddled in a soft blanket at her breast. "Have you thought of a name?" Zach asked, sitting beside them. "Thomas, after his father," Temperance replied. "Thomas Edward Abernathy." "A good, strong name," Zach approved. "Zach," Temperance said softly, "I don't know how to thank you for all you've done. Taking us in, supporting us through this. Most men wouldn't have been so kind to a stranger." "You stopped being a stranger a long time ago, Temperance," Zach said. Acting on impulse, he reached out and gently touched the baby's downy head. "You and Thomas are part of this household now, for as long as you wish to stay." Their eyes met over the baby's head, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since her arrival. "The children will be eager to meet him," Zach said, breaking the charged moment. "Shall I bring them home?" "Yes, please." "I'd like that very much." When Zach returned with his children, their reactions to baby Thomas ranged from Jackson's careful curiosity to Emma's instant adoration to Samuel's slight disappointment that the baby couldn't play with him immediately. "He'll grow fast," Temperance assured Samuel. "Before you know it, he'll be following you everywhere, wanting to do everything you do." "Like I used to do with Jackson?" Samuel asked. "Exactly like that," Zach confirmed, ruffling his youngest son's hair. "He's so tiny," Emma marveled, gently touching Thomas's miniature fingers. "Was I ever that small, Pa? Even smaller," Zach told her with a smile. "Your mother used to say you were no bigger than a loaf of bread when you were born." Instead of the usual sadness that accompanied mentions of Caroline, Zach found himself able to share the memory with a bittersweet fondness. Glancing at Temperance, he saw understanding in her eyes. She wasn't trying to replace Caroline in their lives, but helping them remember her with love rather than just grief. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment as the household adapted to the presence of a newborn. Temperance recovered quickly from the birth, but Zach insisted she take time to rest and heal. Mrs. Henderson's daughter Lily continued to help with household chores, while Zach and the children took on additional responsibilities. To Zach's surprise, Jackson showed a particular interest in baby Thomas, often offering to hold him or bring things Temperance needed. One evening, Zach found his eldest son sitting beside Temperance as she nursed the baby, asking thoughtful questions about infant care. "You're good with him," Zach commented later when he and Jackson were checking on the horses for the night. Jackson shrugged, seemingly embarrassed by the observation. "He's not so bad for a baby, and Mrs. Abernathy needs help." "That's very considerate of you, son." "Pa." Jackson hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Is Mrs. Abernathy going to stay now, or will she leave when Thomas gets bigger?" The question had been haunting Zach as well. "Would you want her to stay?" he asked carefully. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, methodically brushing down his horse. "Yeah," he finally said. "I would. Emma and Samuel too, we talked about it." "You did?" Zach was surprised that his children had discussed the matter among themselves. "Samuel says she makes the best apple cake in Arizona territory. Emma likes learning sewing and cooking from her, and I." Jackson paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I like how she listens. Really listens, you know. And she doesn't try to make us forget Ma. She asks about her sometimes, like she wants us to remember." Zach felt a lump form in his throat at his son's perceptive observation. "Your mother would always want you to remember her, Jackson, and you're right about Mrs. Abernathy. She's special that way." "So is she staying?" Jackson pressed. "That's up to her, son. She came here looking for temporary work, not a permanent situation." "But you want her to stay too, don't you, Pa?" Jackson's direct question caught Zach off guard. "Yes, I do," he admitted, both to his son and to himself. "Very much." Jackson nodded as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "Then you should ask her, before she makes other plans." Out of the mouths of babes, Zach thought wryly. His 11-year-old son was giving him courtship advice, and sound advice at that. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet except for the occasional soft sounds from baby Thomas, Zach found Temperance in the parlor, mending by lamplight. "You should be resting," he said, settling into the chair opposite her. "I feel better when I'm useful," she replied with a small smile. "Besides, Thomas is finally sleeping for longer stretches. I'm taking advantage of the quiet." Zach watched her nimble fingers work the needle through fabric, struck by how right she looked sitting there, how naturally she had fitted herself into their lives. "Temperance," he began, gathering his courage. "We need to talk about the future." Her hands stilled and she looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, I suppose we do. Thomas is nearly a month old now. I should be making arrangements for stay," Zach interrupted. "Please." Her eyes widened slightly. Zach, not as our housekeeper, he clarified quickly. Though God knows you've brought order to this house in ways I never could, but that's not why I'm asking. Then why are you asking? Her voice was soft, uncertain. Zach moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. Because in the months you've been here, you've become essential to us. To me. The children adore you, the house feels like a home again, and I find myself happier than I've been in years. Temperance's eyes filled with tears. Zach, I can't replace Caroline, I wouldn't want to. I'm not asking you to, he assured her. Caroline will always be part of this family, the mother of my children, but there's room in my heart, in all our hearts, for you too, Temperance. For you and Thomas. What exactly are you proposing? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm proposing marriage, Zach said, the words finally out in the open. Not right away, I know it's too soon after Thomas's birth, and you're still grieving your husband. But in time, when you're ready, I want to make our arrangement permanent. I want to be a father to Thomas, and I want you to continue being the wonderful influence you've been on my children. Most of all, I want to wake up every morning knowing you'll be there. A tear slipped down Temperance's cheek. I never expected this when I came here. I was just looking for safe harbor until Thomas was born. And instead I found a family, she whispered, a place to belong again. Is that a yes? Zach asked, his heart pounding. It's a I need time, Temperance replied gently. This is a tremendous decision, Zach. For both of us, for all of us. Though disappointed, Zach nodded in understanding. Of course, take all the time you need. Just know that my feelings won't change. Before she could respond, a cry from upstairs signaled that Thomas had awakened. I should go to him, Temperance said, rising. Zach nodded, releasing her hands reluctantly. Good night, Temperance. Good night, Zach. As she climbed the stairs to tend to her son, Zach remained in the parlor, his emotions a complex mixture of hope, anxiety, and longing. He had laid his heart bare, something he hadn't done since courting Caroline years ago. Now all he could do was wait and trust that Temperance would make the decision that was right for her and her son. The next morning, Zach rose early as usual, surprised to find Temperance already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Baby Thomas was nestled in a basket nearby, sleeping contentedly. You didn't need to be up so early, Zach said, pouring himself coffee. I wanted to, she replied, her eyes meeting his briefly before returning to her task. I've been thinking about what you said last night. Zach's heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to remain calm. And I need to tell you something first. Something I should have told you months ago. The serious tone of her voice alarmed him. What is it? Temperance took a deep breath. The man who's been asking about me in town and at the mining camp, James Abernathy. He isn't Thomas's brother as he claims. He's a claim jumper who threatened Thomas shortly before the mine collapse. Zach frowned, trying to understand the implications. What would he want with you now? Thomas found silver, Temperance said quietly. A rich vein. He told me about it the night before he died, showed me a sample. He was going to register the claim the next day. She paused, her hands twisting her apron. I believe this man either caused or took advantage of the collapse that killed Thomas and the others, and now he's looking for me because he thinks I know where the claim is located. Do you? Zach asked. Thomas drew a map, she admitted. I have it with me. He wanted to ensure that if anything happened to him, I would benefit from his discovery. And this man, this James Abernathy, has been hunting you for the map, Zach concluded grimly. Temperance nodded. I ran because I was afraid. Pregnant and alone, I knew I couldn't stand against a man like that. I thought coming to Bisbee, finding work away from the mining camps, would throw him off my trail. But he's persistent. Why didn't you tell me this before? Zach asked, hurt that she had kept such a secret. At first, I didn't know you well enough to trust you with the information, she said honestly. Later, I was afraid it would endanger you and the children. And then I began to care for all of you too much to risk bringing trouble to your door. Zach reached across the table and took her hand. Temperance, nothing you could tell me would change how I feel, but I need to know everything if I'm going to protect you and Thomas. She squeezed his hand gratefully. There's one more thing you should know. I've decided what to do with the claim. Oh, I want to sell it, she said firmly. Use the money to ensure Thomas's future and perhaps build a future here if your offer still stands. A surge of joy rushed through Zach at her implication. Are you saying yes? A smile slowly spread across Temperance's face, transforming her serious expression. I'm saying that I've grown to love this place, to love your children as if they were my own, and to love you, Zach, in a way I didn't think possible after losing Thomas. Zach rose from his chair and moved around the table, pulling Temperance to her feet and into his arms. I love you too, he said simply, the words feeling right and true as he spoke them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise of deeper feelings to come. When they parted, Temperance's eyes were bright with both tears and happiness. What about this James Abernathy? Zach asked, his protective instincts on high alert. If he's as dangerous as you believe, we need to deal with him first. I thought perhaps we could speak with Sheriff Burke, Temperance suggested. Show him the map and explain the situation. Let the law handle it properly. That's wise, Zach agreed. We'll ride into town today. Before they could discuss it further, the sound of the children descending the stairs interrupted their conversation. By unspoken agreement, they would keep both their engagement and the matter of the silver claim private until after they had spoken with the sheriff. Later that morning, leaving the children in Lily Henderson's care, Zach and Temperance rode to town with baby Thomas securely bundled against his mother's chest. At the sheriff's office, they found Burke cleaning his rifle, his expression growing serious as they explained the situation. This puts a different light on things, the sheriff said when they had finished. I've been hearing rumors about claim jumping and suspicious accidents at some of the smaller mining camps. If this James Abernathy is involved, he's not working alone. What should we do? Temperance asked, unconsciously holding Thomas closer. First, let me see this map, Sheriff Burke said. Temperance withdrew a folded paper from her reticule and spread it on the sheriff's desk. The map was detailed, showing landmarks and directions to a location in the Mule Mountains. I know this area, the sheriff said, studying it carefully. It's remote but accessible. Your husband had a good eye for prospecting, Mrs. Abernathy. What's our next step? Zach pressed. I'll contact the territorial marshal, Burke decided. This goes beyond Bisbee's jurisdiction if it involves multiple mining camps. In the meantime, you two should be extremely careful. This man has already proven he's willing to kill for this claim. Should we leave town? Temperance asked, glancing at Zach. Take the children somewhere safe until this is resolved. The sheriff considered this. Actually, I have a different suggestion. Let's spread word that you're planning to file the claim yourself, Mrs. Abernathy. Use yourself as bait to draw this Abernathy character out, but in a controlled situation where we can apprehend him. Absolutely not, Zach said firmly. I won't put Temperance at risk. Hear me out, the sheriff urged. We'll let it be known that Mrs. Abernathy will be coming to town on a specific day to file the claim. But instead of her, we'll have deputies waiting. Meanwhile, you'll all be safely at the ranch under guard. It could work, Temperance said thoughtfully. James is arrogant. He'd likely try to intercept me before I could file the claim. Zach still looked unconvinced. I don't like using Temperance as bait, even from a distance. I understand your concern, Sheriff Burke said, but this may be our best chance to catch this man and end the threat permanently. Otherwise, you'll always be looking over your shoulder, wondering when he might appear. After further discussion, they reluctantly agreed to the sheriff's plan. Word would be spread that Mrs. Abernathy had decided to file her late husband's claim the following Monday, giving the sheriff time to contact the marshal and arrange for additional deputies. As they left the sheriff's office, Zach remained troubled. "I still don't like this plan," he told Temperance as they walked toward their wagon. "There are too many ways it could go wrong." "I trust Sheriff Burke," Temperance replied, "and I want this resolved, Zach. I want to begin our life together without this shadow hanging over us." The mention of their future together softened Zach's expression. "When did you decide? About us, I mean." Temperance smiled, adjusting Thomas in his sling. "I think I knew when you stayed with me during Thomas's birth. Most men would have fled the house entirely, but you remained, supporting me, refusing to leave me alone." She looked up at him, her green eyes clear and direct. "In that moment, I realized I'd found not just a safe harbor but a true partner." Zach leaned down and kissed her gently, mindful of the baby between them and their public location. "When this is over," he promised, "we'll make it official. As soon as you're ready." "The children should be the first to know," Temperance said as they continued toward the wagon. "I have a feeling they've been expecting this announcement," Zach replied with a smile. "According to Jackson, they've already discussed it among themselves." Temperance laughed, a sound that warmed Zach's heart. Wise children to see what their father was slow to recognize. The ride back to the ranch was filled with tentative plans and shared hopes for their future together. Despite the looming threat of James Abernathy, Zach found himself filled with optimism he hadn't felt in years. When they returned home, they gathered the children in the parlor. Thomas slept peacefully in his basket as Zach and Temperance shared their news. "Mrs. Abernathy has agreed to marry me," Zach announced, taking Temperance's hand in his. "She and Thomas will be permanent members of our family." The children's reactions were everything they could have hoped for. Emma squealed with delight, immediately peppering Temperance with questions about the wedding. Samuel cheered and demanded to know if this meant Thomas was now his brother. And Jackson, though more reserved, smiled in a way that reached his eyes, a rare occurrence since his mother's death. "So you'll be our new ma?" Samuel asked Temperance directly. Temperance knelt to meet his eyes. "I'll be your stepmother, Samuel. Your mother will always be Caroline, and she'll always hold a special place in your heart. But I promise to love and care for you as if you were my own son." Samuel considered this solemnly, then nodded. "That sounds fair, and Thomas will be our brother." "Yes," Zach confirmed. "Your little brother who will look up to all three of you. When will you get married?" Emma wanted to know. "In the spring, perhaps," Temperance suggested, looking to Zach for confirmation. "After the winter passes and when Thomas is a bit older." "That's months away," Emma protested. Zach laughed at his daughter's impatience. "It will give us time to plan properly, and Mrs. Abernathy and I have some business to attend to first." He didn't elaborate on the nature of that business, not wanting to worry the children with talk of claim jumpers and potential danger. For now, it was enough that they were happy about the coming changes to their family. That evening, with the children in bed and Thomas sleeping soundly in his basket, Zach and Temperance sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Arizona sky. "Are you sure about this?" Temperance asked softly. "Taking on another man's child, marrying a widow with a complicated past." Zach turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I've never been more certain of anything. You and Thomas belong here with us. The past, yours and mine, has shaped us, but it doesn't define our future." "And the children?" They seem happy now, but they adore you, Zach interrupted gently. You've brought stability and joy back into their lives. Jackson smiles again. Emma is learning to be a young lady instead of a wild colt. And Samuel. Well, Samuel is still Samuel, but even he listens to you better than he ever did to me. Temperance laughed softly. He's a force of nature, that one. Like his mother was, Zach said, a fond smile touching his lips at the memory of Caroline. She would approve, you know, of you, of us. I hope so, Temperance whispered. I want to honor her memory, not replace it. You already do, Zach assured her, leaning forward to kiss her gently. Every day in 1,000 little ways. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of domestic happiness and underlying tension as they waited for Sheriff Burke's plan to unfold. Deputies were posted discreetly around the ranch property, and Zach made sure his rifle was always within reach. On Sunday evening, the night before the planned trap, Zach checked and rechecked the locks on all doors and windows. Temperance watched his preparations with a mixture of gratitude for his protection and sadness that it was necessary. Try to get some rest, she urged as he made another circuit of the house. Tomorrow will be over soon, and this will all be behind us. Zach nodded, though they both knew sleep would be elusive. The children had been told only that there might be visitors to the ranch the next day, and they were to stay inside no matter what. They retired early, though Zach remained fully dressed, anticipating a long night of vigilance. Shortly after midnight, as he sat by the front window watching the moonlit yard, he heard a soft creak on the stairs. You should be sleeping, he said quietly as Temperance appeared, wrapped in a shawl, Thomas cradled against her shoulder. He was fussy, she explained, settling into a chair beside Zach. I think he senses the tension. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds Thomas's occasional soft noises and the night creatures outside. Tell me about the ranch in springtime, Temperance said suddenly. I arrived in summer, but I've heard Arizona springs are beautiful. Understanding her need for distraction, Zach described the wildflowers that carpeted the hills, the new calves in the pastures, the way the mountains seemed to shake off their winter stillness and come alive with color and movement. We'll be married by then, he said, reaching over to touch Thomas's downy head. A new beginning for all of us. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Zach was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Go upstairs to the children, he ordered Temperance. Lock yourselves in Jackson's room. It has the best vantage point if needed. Zach, go, he said firmly. I'll handle this. Temperance clutched Thomas tighter but did as he asked, hurrying up the stairs. Zach moved to the front window, careful to stay hidden as he peered out. 3 riders approached the house, moving deliberately despite the late hour. As they drew closer, Zach saw that one of the deputies hidden in the barn was moving to intercept them. Before the lawman could reach them, one of the riders spotted him and shouted a warning. Gunfire erupted in the yard. Zach ducked instinctively, then moved quickly to the front door. Through the window, he could see 2 of the riders engaged with the deputies while the third headed directly for the house. Making a split-second decision, Zach positioned himself beside the door, rifle ready. When the door burst open moments later, he brought the butt of the rifle down hard on the intruder's head. The man crumpled to the floor with a groan. Zach quickly disarmed him, using the man's own belt to bind his hands behind his back. Outside, the gunfire had ceased. Cautiously, Zach moved to the doorway. Mr. Xavier, one of the deputies called. We've got them. Are you and the family all right? We're fine, Zach called back. I've got one of them in here, unconscious but alive. As the deputies secured the other 2 men, Zach examined the intruder he'd captured. The man was beginning to stir, his eyes opening to reveal cold blue eyes filled with hatred. "James Abernathy, I presume," Zach said. The man spat on the floor. "Where is she? Where's the widow?" "Safe from you," Zach replied coldly. "As she'll remain." Sheriff Burke arrived shortly after with more deputies, having ridden out from town when the original plan went awry. "One of my informants must have leaked the real location of Mrs. Abernathy," he explained grimly. "These men decided to bypass our trap in town and come directly here." "Will they face justice?" Zach asked, watching as the three men were loaded into a prison wagon. "Absolutely," the sheriff assured him. "We've had reports from 3 different mining camps of similar incidents. The territorial marshal has been building a case against them for months. Your Mrs. Abernathy's testimony and map might be the final pieces needed to hang them." After the lawmen departed with their prisoners, Zach went upstairs to find Temperance and the children huddled together in Jackson's room. All 3 children were awake, wide-eyed but remarkably calm. "It's over," he told them. "The bad men have been caught." Temperance's shoulders sagged with relief, tears filling her eyes. "Thank God." Jackson, who had positioned himself protectively in front of his siblings and Temperance, slowly lowered the hunting knife he'd been clutching. "Are you hurt, Pa?" "No, son. The deputies and Sheriff Burke handled most of it." Zach was filled with pride at his eldest's courage. "You did well, protecting the family. Mrs. Abernathy said I was the man of the house if anything happened to you," Jackson explained seriously. "She was right," Zach agreed, meeting Temperance's eyes over the children's heads. The love and gratitude he saw there made his heart swell. In the days that followed, formal statements were given, paperwork filed, and Temperance's claim to her late husband's silver discovery officially recognized. With the threat removed and her future secure, she made the decision to sell the claim to a mining company for a substantial sum enough to provide for Thomas's future and contribute to their newly forming family. As winter settled over the Arizona territory, the Xavier ranch house was warmer and more alive than it had been in years. The children thrived under Temperance's gentle guidance, and baby Thomas grew stronger each day, his personality beginning to emerge as he responded to his new siblings with toothless smiles and curious eyes. Rather than waiting until spring as originally planned, Zach and Temperance decided to marry before Christmas. "Life is too uncertain to delay happiness," Temperance said when they discussed the change of plans. "The past months have taught me that." The wedding was held in the Bisbee church on a clear December day, with the children standing proudly beside them. Emma as Temperance's attendant, Jackson as Zach's best man, and Samuel holding baby Thomas with surprising gentleness throughout the ceremony. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and Zach kissed his new bride to the cheers of the townsfolk who had come to witness the union. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, the house festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for both the wedding and the approaching Christmas season. Mrs. Henderson had organized the town ladies to provide a feast, and even the most skeptical observers had to admit that the unlikely family formed by circumstance seemed genuinely happy and well-suited. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were finally asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement, Zach and Temperance stood on the porch of their home, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Zach asked softly. Temperance turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. "More than I ever imagined possible again," she replied. "When I came here, I was just seeking shelter for my child. I never expected to find a home for my heart as well." "You brought order to our chaos," Zach said, echoing his words from that first night. and love when we needed it most. And you gave me protection when I was vulnerable, strength when mine was failing," Temperance countered. "We saved each other, I think." As Zach bent to kiss his new wife, he reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together, a pregnant widow seeking refuge, a widower with wild children in need of a mother's touch, both broken by loss but still capable of healing, of loving again. From the ashes of their separate tragedies, they had forged something new and beautiful, a family united not by blood alone, but by choice and love. Inside the house, baby Thomas gave a small cry, soon to be joined by Samuel's sleepy voice calling for his new mother. Temperance smiled against Zach's lips. "Duty calls," she murmured. "It always will," Zach replied, taking her hand as they turned toward the warm light spilling from their home. "But we'll answer it together now." Hand in hand, they went inside to tend to their children, all four of them secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them as one family, bound by love and the promise of a future brighter than either had dared to hope for just 1 year before. 5 years later, the laughter of children echoed across the expanded Xavier Ranch as a spring breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through open windows. Zach paused in his work, smiling at the joyful sounds coming from the direction of the new schoolhouse they had built last summer. Temperance had proven to be not just an exceptional wife and mother, but also a gifted teacher. With her encouragement, Zach had built the small schoolhouse to serve both their growing family and neighboring ranchers' children. 3 days a week, she taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history to nearly 15 children of various ages. From his vantage point near the barn, Zach could see his family gathered under the large oak tree beside the schoolhouse. Jackson, now 16 and nearly as tall as his father, was demonstrating proper lasso technique to an admiring Thomas, who at 5 years old worshipped his eldest brother. Emma, 14 and becoming a beautiful young lady, sat with 3-year-old Rebecca, teaching her to make daisy chains. Samuel, 12 and still bursting with energy, was engaged in what appeared to be a spirited debate with 2-year-old Michael, who responded with the limited but emphatic vocabulary of a toddler. And in the center of it all was Temperance, her auburn hair now streaked with occasional strands of silver, one hand resting on her swollen belly as she watched over their brood. Their 4th child together was due in early summer, and the midwife had suggested it might be twins this time. As if sensing his gaze, Temperance looked up and smiled, raising a hand in greeting. Even after 5 years of marriage, the sight of her smile still caused Zach's heart to skip a beat. He abandoned his task and walked toward his family, reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful day when a pregnant widow had appeared on his porch seeking work. The silver from Thomas's father's claim had provided the capital to expand the ranch, build the schoolhouse, and establish a comfortable future for all their children. But the true wealth, Zach knew, was in the family they had created together. Papa. Rebecca spotted him first, breaking away from Emma to run toward him on chubby legs. Zach swept her up into his arms, planting a kiss on her rosy cheek. "How's my little flower today?" he asked as she giggled and patted his face with small hands. "Made crowns with Emma," she informed him seriously, pointing to the circle of daisies perched precariously on her dark curls. "Very beautiful," Zach assured her as he approached the rest of the family. Thomas abandoned his lasso lesson to join them. "Pa. Jackson says I'm getting better with the rope. Soon I can help with the calves." "Is that so?" Zach ruffled the boy's hair. "Well, if Jackson says it, it must be true. He's the best hand on this ranch after all." Jackson straightened with pride at the compliment, though he tried to hide it with a shrug. He's got good coordination for a 5-year-old, he admitted. Better than Samuel at that age. Hey, Samuel protested, abandoning his conversation with Michael. I was plenty coordinated. You fell into the horse trough 3 times in 1 week, Emma reminded him with a teasing smile. That was on purpose, Samuel claimed, though his grin betrayed the lie. Temperance laughed, the sound still one of Zach's favorite things in the world. Children, that's enough teasing. Your father looks like he could use some lunch after working all morning. As the children gathered their things, Zach moved to Temperance's side, placing a supportive hand at her back as she rose from her seated position. How are you feeling? He asked quietly. Like I'm carrying a small herd of cattle, she replied with a wry smile, but otherwise well. The lesson went smoothly today. Zach kissed her temple. You're amazing, you know that, teaching all these children while carrying 2 more. We don't know for certain it's twins, Temperance reminded him, though her hand caressed her prominent belly with a knowing touch. Though I must admit, I feel quite different this time. Whatever God blesses us with, we'll welcome, Zach said, a sentiment they had expressed many times over the years. As they walked toward the house together, surrounded by their chattering children, Zach reflected on the journey that had brought them here. There had been challenges, of course adjustments as they learned to be partners, moments of grief when memories of their first spouses surfaced unexpectedly, the typical struggles of raising a blended family. But there had been far more joy, watching Thomas take his first steps toward Jackson, who had knelt with open arms to receive him. Emma's proud face as she served the first complete meal she had prepared under Temperance's guidance. Samuel's surprising gentleness with each new sibling, the community that had formed around their expanding family and school. Most precious of all had been the quiet moments Temperance reading to the children by firelight. The family gathered around the table for meals, the private conversations he and Temperance shared late at night when the house was finally still. Penny for your thoughts, Temperance said as they reached the porch. Zach smiled, drawing her closer to his side. I was just thinking how fortunate I am that you knocked on our door that day, that you brought order and love to a house that desperately needed both. And I was thinking how grateful I am that you opened that door, she replied softly. That you gave shelter to a desperate woman and her unborn child when others might have turned us away. The best decision I ever made, Zach said, bending to kiss her softly. Their moment was interrupted by Michael tugging insistently at Zach's pant leg. Papa, hungry now, Temperance laughed. Some things never change. The Xavier children are still ruled by their stomachs. Xavier children, Zach repeated, the phrase still filling him with wonder and pride. All of them, from Jackson to this little one. He placed his hand on her belly, feeling the strong kick of their next child or children. That evening, with the younger children tucked into bed and the older ones engaged in quiet activities, Zach and Temperance sat on the porch swing he had built for her 3rd birthday as his wife. The spring air was cool but not cold, filled with the promise of growth and renewal. I received a letter from Mrs. Henderson today, Temperance said, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. Lily's expecting her 2nd child. Already, Zach chuckled. That blacksmith's apprentice she was mooning over certainly didn't waste any time after their wedding. They're happy, Temperance said. Like us. Zach took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he had placed there 5 years ago. Are you happy, I mean, even with all this chaos and noise and endless work? Temperance lifted her head to look at him directly. Zachariah Xavier, are you truly asking me that after all this time? I just want to be sure, he said, that this life we've built together is everything you hoped for. It's more, she said simply. When Thomas died, I thought my chance at happiness died with him. When I came here, I was just hoping for safety and stability until I could find my feet again." She placed her free hand on his cheek. "I never imagined I would find love again, or that my son would have such a wonderful father and siblings. I never dreamed I would have more children of my own, or a school to teach in, or a community that has embraced us so completely, even with the town gossips." Zach teased, referring to the speculation that still occasionally surfaced about their hasty marriage and the rapid expansion of their family. Even with Mrs. Parker and her sewing circle, Temperance confirmed with a smile, "They've mostly come around, you know. Especially after we donated that land for the new church." "Silver well spent," Zach said, referencing the claim that had provided so much for their family. They fell into comfortable silence, rocking gently in the swing as the stars emerged in the clear Arizona sky. From inside the house came the familiar creaks and soft sounds of their home settling for the night. "I love you, Temperance Xavier," Zach said finally, the words no less heartfelt for having been said countless times over the years. "And I love you," she replied, nestling closer to him despite her swollen belly making it somewhat awkward. "Thank you for giving us a home." "Thank you for making it one," he countered. As they sat together under the vast canopy of stars, surrounded by the home and family they had built together from grief and hope and second chances, Zach knew with absolute certainty that they had created something rare and precious, a love story that had not ended with "I do," but had only just begun, continuing to unfold with each passing day, each new child, each challenge faced and overcome together. The wild children who had once run unchecked through the streets of Bisbee were now growing into fine young adults. The pregnant widow who had sought only temporary shelter had found a permanent home for her heart. And the grieving cowboy who had struggled alone for too long had discovered that love, like the Arizona wildflowers after a spring rain, could bloom again in the most unexpected places and seasons. Together, they had transformed chaos into order, loneliness into love, and separate tragedies into a shared joy that would sustain them through whatever the future might bring.